Hello again. Welcome back. I know that it's not yet tea time in Greenwich, but I understand that we've had our tea and coffee. And it also seems that tech providers, society watchdogs, and international institutions are the best actors on the online stage. They are the ones who can foster trustworthiness and induce responsible behavior in cyberspace. This is a subject best tackled after our coffee break by Michael Chertoff, co-chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace and the US Secretary of Homeland Security in 2005-2009. And he will be back with us in a moment, but now the floor is to Michael Chertoff.
As we look at the development of the internet, we understand that an increasing role all elements of society have to play in securing a global, accessible internet that benefits everybody around the world. When the internet was originally developed, it was a project between academics and government officials, all of whom knew and trusted each other. So trust was not designed in the original platform or the protocols under which the internet operates. But once the internet became commercialized and ubiquitous around the world, the issue of trust became a bigger challenge. And now, as we are recovering, hopefully, from the COVID virus, we see more and more of our economic activity, social activity, and government activity occurs online. And that's likely to remain the case even going forward. That exposes some of the challenges to the operation of the internet. We have different views around the world on how we collect, preserve, and protect our personal data and our rights of privacy. The issue of security has become paramount in cyberspace. As we've seen the internet become not only a vehicle for criminals, but for nation states engaged in what is sometimes called hybrid warfare. So, for example, we've seen examples of ransomware, like NotPetya, which was launched against Ukraine and caused enormous damage to businesses by locking up and rendering useless all of their business records. In the last 5 years, we've seen 2 occasions on which the Ukrainian power system was attacked and shut out the power at Christmas time for a period of time. So now the issue of cyberspace as a vector for conflict has become very much forefront of the mind of people all over the world. This has propelled many to say we need to build walled gardens around each national internet in order to protect our data and protect our security. And clearly these are important objectives. But at the same time, an internet that is merely a series of not well-linked national networks essentially eliminates much of the value of the internet for the globe in general. In that way, the internet is a little bit like the sea. It's only really valuable if everybody can sail more or less unhindered. So for trade purposes, for educational purposes, even for social purposes, a fragmented internet would undercut much of the value of this tremendous advance in modern technology. So how do we regain trust on a global basis without being naive or delusional about the reality of some of the challenges we face? Because the truth is there are some substantial differences in how we respect and protect data and how we regard security and the possibility of conflict over the internet. On the other hand, there are areas where we can operate perhaps with a common interest. And I come back to the law of the sea, which is sometimes described as a global commons. It's a valuable resource, but only if everybody cooperates globally to protect its essential character. And so we all have to agree that whatever our differences in particular cases, We will work together on things we might agree with more generally that protect the sea. And that's also true of the internet. I had the privilege of co-chairing the Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace, a project that was international, that had commissioners from all over the world, that were sponsored by governments and by major technological corporations. And the idea was to find some common ground on norms and principles that we thought we could expect almost all countries to respect in order to preserve the essential character of the internet. And some of these norms and principles have now been taken up to be debated by the United Nations and may eventually actually find their way into international law. But let me briefly review what these norms are so you get a sense of how these are things which all countries might agree we have a common interest in preserving, and we can expect to get agreement on, even if there'll be other areas where we have quite considerable disagreement. One norm is protecting the public internet. It's recognizing that even when there is conflict, that we should not take steps that eliminate the basic underlying infrastructure and architecture that allows the internet to function. So, for example, by somehow damaging or disrupting the protocols which allow for the transmission of data over the internet infrastructure. This is similar to, in the physical world, what we have with the Geneva Convention, where we say there are certain kinds of public infrastructure that should not be bombed or destroyed, and that's outside of what is permitted by the law of war. Another critical element that we think we can get agreement on for norms is election protection. Not having people use the internet to actually damage or disrupt the ability to have a faithful and honest tally of votes, something that is of significance to countries all over the world. There is also a set of norms that are directed to making sure that as we put new applications and new hardware onto the internet, we do it in a way that doesn't compromise the security of the vast majority of people. Even if there are times when geopolitical conflict and rivalry cause one country to engage in acts of espionage or even to take steps to compromise the military capabilities of a rival, again, civilians ought to be off limits. So we have norms, for example, saying that governments should not have a policy of generally tampering with the security on devices that are made available to everybody for all kinds of things, like their health, their banking, and their education. By the same token, when there are vulnerabilities that are discovered, there should be a process to determine whether they should be publicly disclosed and corrected, balancing the value of a vulnerability that's unknown to an intelligence collection organization against the general damage to the public if criminals were to find that vulnerability and exploit it. And of course, we have a norm that indicates that the companies themselves have an obligation to police for vulnerabilities and to correct them when they are discovered. There's a norm against countries taking over the devices of innocent civilians in order to create botnets which can be used for conflict purposes, like massive denial of service attacks. Again, this is similar to the Geneva Convention principle that you shouldn't locate offensive weapons in people's houses or hospitals or elementary schools, because you're then creating a target of civilians who are not combatants. And finally, we have a norm that talks about the fact that state actors should not allow non-state actors to engage in offensive cyber operations. When we allow criminal groups or terrorist groups to engage in offensive cyber operations, we are raising to a great degree the likelihood that innocent people will be hurt or even killed, and that there'll be substantial damage to the overall functioning of the internet. So we are promoting these norms. We think that this is the kind of general global approach that is realistic to try to achieve. At the same time, understanding that there is a limit to where we can reach agreement, and there will continue to be some areas where we have to agree to disagree, but hopefully in a peaceful way. So the agenda is before us. Norms to preserve the essential core of the internet, at the same time without being unrealistic in terms of our expectations. I wish you the best of luck at the virtual conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for setting the tone.